Nietzsche perpetually challenges us to peer beyond social facades, where what we label as love, desire, or virtue often reveals itself as elaborate games of power and instinct. When he speaks about women, he does so neither comfortably nor romantically. Quite the opposite, he probes deep wounds. What truly motivates women? Is it the pursuit of love, security, or something darker and more instinctive, connected to power and life itself? What if gentleness were merely a more refined form of strength? What if surrender were also a survival calculation? To ask these questions means treading dangerous ground because it exposes truths many prefer to avoid. Nietzsche never intended to create dogmas, but rather to open wounds of consciousness. The question isn't what women are, but what humanity, both men and women, conceals beneath the skin of what we call love. The question is brutal. How far are you willing to see? If this kind of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and join this journey. Nietzsche held profound aversion to any form of idealization. For him, love wasn't some delicate flower born from soul's purity, but machinery made of instincts, forces, and invisible calculations. When he observed feminine love, Nietzsche saw not merely surrender, but above all mask. Woman, according to him, learned early to cover her instincts with veils of delicacy and sweetness. A smile might be affection, but it could also be strategy. Silence might be fragility, but it could also be veiled power. The great question Nietzsche poses is, how much of what we call love is actually a game of appearances? The philosopher perceived in women a vital potency linked to life itself, to continuity, to the instinct of perpetuation. But this instinct, instead of revealing itself crudely, emerges camouflaged in gestures of affection and in what men wish to see. Woman, in the Nietzschean view, learns to mold her image according to masculine gaze. She is actress, but not in the pejorative sense. She acts because life itself obliges her to do so. To survive, to be desired, to conquer space, woman wears masks, and in doing so, she reveals that love's essence was never sincerity, but necessity. Nietzsche didn't say this as moral condemnation. For him, there's no morality in instinct, only force. When a woman shows sweetness, it's often not kindness, but strategy. When she appears distant, it may not be coldness, but calculation. It's harsh to hear this, because it dismantles the romantic vision we carry. But this brutality also liberates. If love is game, we can finally stop treating it as myth. We can look at it as it is, without illusions. In daily life, this vision becomes evident. Who hasn't lived the experience of feeling that a relationship seemed honest and pure, but later discovered hidden interests? We often think the other is with us for love, but truth is they might be there from fear of solitude, material necessity, convenience, status, or simply preservation instinct. This applies to both men and women, but Nietzsche saw in woman a clearer mirror of this mechanism, precisely because she became master in using masks. The problem isn't the mask itself. The problem is when we believe no mask exists. Love becomes prison when we idealize it, when we believe it's pure, eternal, and absolute. But by recognizing masks, we can perceive underground forces that move each gesture. Tenderness might be genuine, but it might also be artifice. Jealousy might be pain, but it might also be control. Care might be affection, but it might also be possession. Everything depends on the gaze we cast upon these expressions. Nietzsche teaches us that no love exists without power. What we call love is also silent struggle, a duel of forces masked by caresses and sweet words. The mask is life's way of making this duel less violent, more bearable. Without mask, love would be crude, almost unbearable. With mask, it becomes beautiful, even though its essence continues being struggle. This doesn't mean truth doesn't exist in affections, but rather that truth never comes naked. It always appears covered by veils, adorned by symbols, disguised by gestures. Woman, according to Nietzsche, understands this intuitively. That's why she dominates the art of appearance, because she understands that life doesn't sustain itself only with harsh truths, but with well-constructed illusions. Man, on the other hand, usually deceives himself believing that pure essence exists behind love, when in reality he faces vital performance. And perhaps it's precisely this performance that keeps us alive. Love needs mask, not to dissolve into brutality. The question is, are we prepared to recognize that behind sweet smile, calculation also exists? That behind fragility, strength also exists? That behind love, power also exists? This question is uncomfortable, but liberating. In the end, Nietzsche isn't asking us to reject love, but to strip it of illusions. To love isn't to live a fairy tale. To love is to accept the game of masks, understand that appearance is also life, that disguise is also instinct. Woman teaches us this with her silent art of enchanting, manipulating, and surviving. And we, if we have courage, can learn to love without becoming prisoners of romantic illusion, because the true danger isn't the mask itself, but believing it doesn't exist. Nietzsche believed that behind all human gestures exists deeper impulse, the will to live. And if life is will, desire cannot be merely pleasure or romance. It is survival, it is continuity instinct, it is force that drags us beyond consciousness. When we speak of feminine desire, Nietzsche interprets it not as delicate search for affection, but as life's most ancient expression to perpetuate itself, to secure itself, to find means to remain. Desire, then, isn't innocence. It's an invisible battlefield where biological, cultural, and spiritual forces intertwine. For Nietzsche, woman always understood this more viscerally than man. Man tends to think of desire as conquest, victory, immediate pleasure. Woman in Nietzschean reading sees desire as strategy. She knows that through it, she can guarantee protection, create power bonds, choose partners who favor her survival and that of children. It's instinct, but it's also calculation. If we observe daily life, we see this clearly. A young woman who chooses to approach someone older and stable perhaps isn't moved only by passion. A woman who gets involved with someone rebellious and unpredictable perhaps doesn't seek only emotion, but also strength, energy, vitality. In both cases, desire disguises itself as romance, but carries within itself a survival map. Nietzsche provokes us to see what's hidden. Desire isn't only attraction, but also selection. That's why Nietzsche distrusted romantic narratives. He saw love and desire as gears of much broader machine, life wanting to perpetuate itself. Tenderness is surface, but root is biological, instinctive, almost cruel. When woman desires, it's not only she who desires, it's life within her, demanding continuity, demanding expression. This might sound cold, but it's precisely what makes Nietzsche's analysis so penetrating. He removes mask and shows us nakedness of vital force. And yet, reducing desire only to biology would betray Nietzsche himself. For him, life isn't only instinct, but also will to power. Feminine desire, therefore, doesn't limit itself to survival in animal sense. It's also silent power, capacity to mold destinies, to influence trajectories. Woman who chooses with whom she desires isn't only perpetuating life, but determining the form this life will take. She's creator, not merely reproducer. Nietzsche perceived in this hidden grandeur. Behind delicacy, there was brutal force, because desire wasn't only to feel, but to decide life's future. Thus, feminine carried within itself cunning that man often didn't perceive. While he deluded himself with idea that he conquered, it was he, in truth, who was being chosen. This inversion is uncomfortable, but reveals how feminine desire's power goes beyond visible. In daily life, we've all felt this dynamic. Man believes he's in control, when in reality he was attracted, conducted, even manipulated by subtle signs. Choice wasn't his, but of force that manifested itself through gaze, gesture, woman's presence. Nietzsche invites us to abandon conquest's illusion and perceive truth. Desire is always dance, where both sides fight for survival, but woman, through her own connection with life, dances with more wisdom. This perspective places us before disturbing question. If desire is survival, to what extent are our choices really free? Do we love because we choose, or only because we obey greater force that drags us without perceiving? Nietzsche doesn't give easy answers. He shows us that when we desire, we're taken by something that surpasses us. We are simultaneously subjects and instruments of life. Thus, feminine desire, far from being whim or romantic game, is vital strategy. It moves woman not only toward pleasure, but toward continuity, preservation, power. And understanding this, we perceive that what we call love or passion is in truth life's theater, where each gesture, each gaze, each approach is also survival act. Nietzsche therefore invites us to face desire without naivety. It's neither sin nor miracle nor only emotion. It's life pulsing, demanding, imposing. Recognizing this might be painful, but it can also liberate us. Because when we know desire is survival, we stop romanticizing it and begin respecting its force as what it really is, the crudest expression of will to live. Nietzsche had horror for any form of idolatry. For him, placing someone on pedestal was always sign of weakness, of escape from reality, of incapacity to face life as it is. When he spoke about woman, Nietzsche attacked precisely this custom of transforming her into romantic ideal, into untouchable muse, into divine creature. To idolize woman, he said, is to kill her as human being and transform her into ghost. Danger doesn't lie in woman herself, but in illusion created around her. Man who idealizes woman doesn't see reality. He projects onto her his own lacks, his own dreams, his need to find something perfect in imperfect world. But this perfection is poison. The higher the pedestal, the more inevitable the fall. Nietzsche saw in this self-sabotage mechanism, by deifying woman, man becomes slave to his own illusion. He doesn't relate to who she is, but to image he invented of her. And same occurs on feminine side. When woman sees herself placed on this pedestal, she also imprisons herself. Being idealized means losing freedom to be imperfect, contradictory, human. She becomes object of others' dream, not subject of own life. It's golden prison in which woman is celebrated, but isn't really seen. Nietzsche dismantles this farce by showing that idolatry isn't love, but blindness. In daily life, we see this repeat. How many relationships begin with exaggerated exaltation of other, "You're perfect, you're everything I ever dreamed," and end in deep frustration when reality appears. Fall is always painful because there was no love for real person, but only for illusion. Nietzsche teaches us that the more we idolize, the more we distance ourselves from truth. And truth, for him, is always harsh, contradictory, made of instinct and flaws. Danger of idolatry isn't only individual frustration, but also dependence. When someone is transformed into idol, other becomes smaller. Man who places woman on pedestal ends up diminishing himself, becomes servant of ideal. He lives in function of her, not from genuine love, but from need to sustain his own fantasy. And when this fantasy dissolves, only resentment remains. How many love stories don't end in hatred precisely because idealized person didn't correspond to role of perfect goddess? Nietzsche didn't want to destroy love, but liberate it from illusion. He believed that to truly love, it was necessary to abandon idolatry. To love isn't to transform other into saint, but to accept their humanity, their instincts, their contradictions. It's to see woman not as angel, but as vital being, full of force and cunning. Only then love ceases being prison and can become true encounter. Problem is that idolatry is tempting. It offers us comfort, gives meaning to solitude, creates sensation that something pure and perfect exists in imperfect world. But Nietzsche reminds us, all absolute purity is lie. Life is mixture, excess, chaos. To love is to accept this, not flee from it. To idolize woman is to refuse life as it is, and Nietzsche always fought any form of escape. When we think about this, uncomfortable question arises. Do we love person who's before us, or only idea we project onto them? This reflection is brutal because it forces us to face our own illusions. Often we don't relate to other, but only to reflection of our desires. Nietzsche tears this veil and calls us to confrontation with reality. Danger of idolatry, therefore, is double. It imprisons other and imprisons us. It prevents woman from being human and prevents man from being free. Idolatry creates farce that inevitably ends in pain. Nietzsche doesn't ask us to reject love, but to reject lie of idealized love. Only when we stop idolizing can we truly love. And perhaps this is hardest lesson. True greatness isn't in worshipping, but in seeing. To love someone isn't to place that person in heaven, but to be willing to walk with them on earth. Nietzsche never believed in what common sense called feminine fragility. For him, feminine was always more dangerous, more strategic, more vital than most men dared admit. While man presented himself as brute force, conquest, war and dominion, woman, in Nietzschean view, moved silently, subtly, almost invisibly, but with even greater power, influence. Man believed he was in command, but was conducted by invisible threads, by discreet gestures, by presence that acted not with direct imposition, but with refined art. Feminine in this sense wasn't weakness, but hidden strength. Nietzsche observed that woman didn't need same brutality as man to obtain what she wanted. She knew art of detail, gaze that dismantles certainties, word that turns destiny, silence that obliges other to act. It was as if woman dominated sphere that escaped masculine logic. Man made war with swords, woman made war with symbols. Man imposed with shouts, woman imposed with silences. This difference, far from being inequality, was form of veiled supremacy. In daily life, this appears almost banally. Husband makes decision thinking it's fruit of his own will, but this will was molded by companion, who conducted him without him perceiving to consider certain options and discard others. Apparently, fragile mother directs her children's future with small gestures, subtle phrases, with presence that seems discreet, but marks profoundly. Even in social power relations, Nietzsche perceived that woman didn't need to be at front line to be decisive. Her influence happened beneath surface, like underground current that drags giant ships without ever being seen. This hidden force was, for Nietzsche, manifestation of will to power itself, but in its most refined version. While man sought power explicitly in politics, war, economy, woman exercised it implicitly, acting in intimate, invisible, psychological. It's no wonder Nietzsche saw in woman fascinating danger. She didn't attack frontally, but corroded from within, dismantled defenses without firing shot. And this was precisely her superiority. Therefore, Nietzsche criticized men who believed they dominated women only with physical or social force. They were, in truth, dominated without perceiving. Game of feminine power was so sophisticated that man judged himself free, when in truth he was already ensnared. Woman, according to Nietzsche, understood better than man that life isn't made of absolute truths, but of appearances, games, masks. And by dominating this art of appearance, she became closer to life's own essence. This point is crucial. Nietzsche associated feminine with life in its most instinctive and creative dimension. While man sought stability, laws, structures, woman represented flow, transformation, nature's own cunning. It was as if feminine were life's secret face, one that doesn't show itself directly, but governs everything beneath surface. Thus, to love woman, for Nietzsche, was like approaching existence's own enigma. Seductive, dangerous, inevitable. However, this vision wasn't romantic celebration. Nietzsche didn't speak of feminine as divine, but as crude force, vital, sometimes cruel. He reminded us that feminine influence isn't necessarily kindness. It can be manipulation, it can be calculation, it can be cruelty. And there's nothing wrong with this, because for Nietzsche, life doesn't sustain itself in purity, but in mixture between tenderness and brutality. Feminine embodies exactly this mixture, can be shelter, but can also be storm. Danger lies in not recognizing this hidden force. Man who sees woman only as fragile or submissive not only underestimates her, but also exposes himself to invisible manipulation he doesn't know how to perceive. On the other hand, one who recognizes this force learns to deal with it consciously. Consciousness, for Nietzsche, is always first step toward freedom. Knowing that feminine acts as hidden influence liberates us from naivety, even though it places us before uncomfortable truths. Nietzsche saw in this dynamic lesson for all humanity. Deepest power isn't what shows itself, but what remains hidden. Woman, by exercising power silently, reveals that true force doesn't need shouts. What really moves life's gears isn't what appears, but what remains concealed. In practice, this leads us to painful reflection. How many of our most important decisions weren't, in truth, molded by invisible influences? How many paths we thought we chose freely, but were, deep down, oriented by desire to please, by fear of losing, by subtlety of gesture that marked us? Nietzsche invites us to look at this directly and admit that our freedom is never complete because we're always crossed by forces that conduct us, mainly by feminine's silent force. In end, woman appears in Nietzsche not as fragility, but as very symbol of life in its most cunning and irresistible form. Feminine is mystery, is influence, is hidden power. And understanding this isn't despising woman, but honoring her complexity. Recognizing her silent force is also recognizing that world isn't moved only by what's seen, but mainly by what's hidden. And perhaps greatest question Nietzsche leaves at this point is, how many times in your own life were you conducted not by clear reason, but by hidden force that acted silently within you and around you? Nietzsche always faced love as battlefield. For him, there was no human affection that didn't carry, in its essence, power game. Love, so celebrated as union and sweetness, was also territory of domination, and this, instead of being defect, was part of its own nature. When two people meet under love's name, what really happens is shock of forces, silent fight for influence, for control, for freedom space. In Nietzschean gaze, feminine love and masculine love never present themselves identically. Man usually imagines love as possession. He wants to take, dominate, secure for himself, object of desire. Woman, conversely, rarely lets herself be trapped without transforming this prison into power. She can surrender, but her surrender is never innocent. She surrenders and simultaneously governs. It's here that dynamic between love and domination becomes clearest. Who thinks they're dominating often is already dominated. Nietzsche harshly criticized romantic idea of pure love, without conflict. For him, where there's life, there's struggle. Where there's desire, there's dispute. Believing in love, exempt from domination, is believing in something that never existed. Love, on contrary, is war disguised as harmony, is combat masked by sweet words. Each gesture of care might contain possession. Each fidelity oath might hide fear. Each surrender act might also be manipulation form. In daily life, we see this clearly. How many times does loving relationship transform into control? Partner who begins deciding with whom other can or cannot speak, what they can wear, where they can go. This is called love, but deep down, it's dominion. On the other hand, how many times does someone use fragility as weapon? Silence, crying, absence, all this can be strategy to bend others' will. This is also called love, but in essence, it's power exercised by invisible means. Nietzsche would say, "Don't be deceived, it's always struggle." But then most uncomfortable question arises. If love is domination, is there space for freedom within it? Nietzsche doesn't give simple answer. For him, freedom isn't absence of power, but consciousness of it. No relationship exists without dispute, but it's possible to love lucidly, knowing game is happening, without being imprisoned by purity's illusion. True freedom in love isn't escaping struggle, but facing it directly, without denying its existence. This obliges us to rethink how we relate. When we enter relationship expecting to find only welcome and softness, we condemn ourselves to disappointment. When conversely we accept that loving is also confronting, negotiating, disputing, we can live truer love. It doesn't mean transforming relationship into open war, but recognizing that dispute is always there, even when silenced. Nietzsche believed that strongest love isn't what tries to eliminate struggle, but what supports it. To love someone is to accept that this person also wants to dominate, also wants to influence, also wants to impose their will. Question is, can we live this tension without becoming slaves? Nietzschean answer is yes, but only when we abandon romantic naivety and face love as it really is. Simple example, when man demands that woman be only his, he's exercising domination. But when woman accepts this demand, she's not necessarily surrendering. She might be playing another game, conquering, through apparent submission, even greater power over him. This seems paradoxical, but reveals love's complexity. What seems weakness might be strategy. What seems surrender might be dominion. Nietzsche reminds us, love is never what it seems. And it's precisely in this paradox that freedom chance arises. Freedom in love doesn't mean power absence, but dynamic balance between forces. It's when both recognize struggle and, even so, choose to remain. There's no purity illusion, but there's reality, acceptance. To love, for Nietzsche, is to have courage to inhabit battlefield without wanting to flee from it. This gaze can be disturbing, but it's also liberating. It allows us to understand why so many relationships fail. Not because there was too much love, but because there was too much naivety. We expect love to be paradise and forget it's also hell. We want total harmony, but forget we're made of instincts, ego, will to power. Error isn't in loving, but in denying tension that love inevitably brings. Thus, true Nietzschean learning is, no love exists without domination. What we can choose is whether we'll live this domination unconsciously, as slaves of illusions, or consciously, as warriors who know how to dance in middle of combat. This consciousness doesn't kill love. On contrary, it makes it deeper because it forces us to face other as they really are. Not ideal, not angel, but human being full of force and contradiction. And perhaps it's there that love becomes more beautiful. Not when it's perfection, but when it's struggle lived with courage. Not when it's purity, but when it's mixture. Not when it's prison, but when it's lucid choice to remain, even facing silent battle that never stops happening. After traveling through shadows of love, desire, and hidden power, Nietzsche leaves us before inevitable question. If what we call love is always covered with masks, if behind sweetness calculation exists, if every care gesture might contain domination, what remains after all? Is it still possible to love, or is love nothing more than illusion theater sustained by instinct and survival necessity? For Nietzsche, it's not about denying love, but stripping it of romantic illusions. He didn't want us to abandon love experience, but to live it consciously. What remains beyond masks isn't purity, but life. Love isn't ethereal ideal. It's will to power, its instinct flow, its vitality that pulses under form of human bonds. When we accept this, we stop demanding from love what it can never give us, eternity, perfection, completeness, and begin seeing it as what it really is. Force field that challenges us to grow. Nietzsche believed that both men and women are moved by same root, will to power. Difference is that each manifests this will in distinct ways. Man tends to be more explicit, more direct, more brutal. Woman, more subtle, more cunning, more silent. But deep down, both are expressions of same vital energy. What really moves women is same that moves men. Desire to expand own life, to leave mark, to perpetuate oneself. This revelation might seem cold, but contains also liberation promise. When we stop idealizing, we open space for truer love. Not true in sense of pure, but in sense of lucid. Love that knows it carries within itself egoism, calculation, jealousy, domination, desire, but doesn't get frightened by it. Love that accepts imperfection and struggle as part of being a live experience. In daily life, this perspective change can completely transform how we relate. Instead of expecting other to be source of our perfect happiness, we begin seeing them as battle companion. Instead of disappointing ourselves with their flaws, we begin recognizing them as inevitable part of life. Instead of seeking paradise that will never exist, we learn to find beauty in chaos. Nietzsche believed that only who accepts life's cruelty can really affirm it. Same applies to love. Only who accepts its struggle dimension can really live it deeply. To love isn't to deny instinct, but embrace it. It isn't to flee from domination, but dance with it. It isn't to expect purity, but find intensity in mixture between light and shadow. And here arises final question, perhaps most disturbing of all. Are we ready to love without illusions? Because this demands courage. It demands abandoning need for idols, purities, certainties. It demands looking at other and saying, I know you are instinct, calculation, power, just like me. And even so, I choose to be here. What remains beyond masks isn't angelic love, but human love, too human. Love that doesn't pretend to save, but can transform, precisely because it's born from truth. Nietzsche teaches us that life isn't for weak spirits, neither is loving. Who truly loves doesn't seek comfort, but intensity, doesn't pursue rest, but growth, doesn't want anesthesia, but confrontation. In end, what really moves women isn't only instinct, nor only calculation, nor only power. What moves them is same force that crosses all existence, will to live, to expand, to leave trace in world. Same applies to men. Difference lies only in how each plays game. And understanding this is abandoning naiveties, but it's also opening space for more courageous and authentic way of loving. Nietzsche didn't want you to reject love. He wanted you to live it without deceiving yourself. That instead of clinging to fragile illusions, you'd have courage to embrace real with all its harshness and beauty. Because love, like life, is struggle, and only who accepts struggle can, in fact, be free. We've traveled hard but transformative journey. We learned with Nietzsche that love isn't purity, but instinct, that desire is survival and calculation, that idolatry is prison, that feminine isn't fragility, but hidden force, that all love is also domination. and that beyond masks, only life remains in its brutal intensity. And now I ask you, which illusion about love has imprisoned you most until today? Which city are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to keep diving deep into philosophy's depths with us.